70% Latino. In some of them, most of them Mexican, half undocumented. You have booming businesses all over the place, immigrant businesses that were not here 10 years ago.
That was an excerpt of Nueva York. Juan.
Mike, talk a little bit about the decision to do the film in addition to take account of the post-1945 period, which is actually what most Americans regard as the Latino presence in the city, and the decision to include the film as part of the overall exhibition.
Most Americans in general, and most Latinos as well. It's been remarkable, the number of people who are packing into the exhibition who are from one or another of those countries, who simply don't know the pre-Second War history. I would personally have much preferred to run the story on down till now, but the level of complexity, the number of countries that are involved after 1945 is, or is not, this is something we're going to discuss this evening, not just a quantitative change, but a qualitative change. And it wasn't possible to do all of it. And the stuff before 1945 is what's least known and is our particular contribution. So, on the other hand, we wanted something as a connecting link. So Rick signed on to do a film that basically picked up the story and in a very abbreviated form told what happened from 45 on down till now.
I wanted to go to Ray Suarez in Rick Burns' documentary, Nueva York. This is a clip.
All those old boundaries between norteño and Mexican pop and salsa and reggaeton, all those boundaries are being smashed because the axis of cultural power is swinging away from San Juan and Miami and Rio and Mexico City and toward the north, where the United States is going to take its place as one of the largest Spanish-speaking countries on earth and create its own art and create its own fusion of people who are growing up in America of Latin American origin, who carry both with them into their creative expression. All those old cultural categories are being swept away by the power of numbers, by the power of commerce, by the power of attraction. It's an enormous new idea, a pan-Latin idea.
That was Ray Suarez, senior correspondent for the PBS NewsHour from the documentary Nueva York. And Juan Gonzalez is also a real main feature of this film. Let's go to one of those clips.
Part of the problem for Americans to understand this huge migration change is to understand what propelled the people to come. Both Puerto Ricans who were U.S. citizens, but also the Mexicans and the Ecuadorians and the Dominicans who came after them. Every one of those countries had major problems, very often as a result of our own government's policies there. And several of them faced years of the most brutal kind of dictatorships that were supported by the United States. Trujillo in the Dominican Republic, the Somozas in Nicaragua, Batista in Cuba, all of these were allies of the United States. All of them repressed their countries, and all of them basically were pliant supporters of the needs of American business in their countries. As a result, the economies of all these countries were distorted, and so much of the wealth of the countries left the country, left and came here. So that the migrants then were basically forced to leave. They had no choice, if they were going to survive, but to leave their country. And the easiest place to leave to, because of all the economic ties, the transportation and communication that had already been established, was the United States.
An excerpt of the documentary Nueva York by Rick Burns. That's Juan Gonzalez, who's featured in the film. The effect of Latino shaping New York, Mike Wallace.
Well, there are many aspects of this, but one of the things that we feature in the exhibition is the whole cultural interrelationship. New Yorkers pride themselves on things without quite considering the antecedents. So arguably one of the most important cultural contributions to world art is the New York School of Abstract Expressionists. But most people do not know that Jackson Pollock in 1934 was taking courses with Siqueiros on 14th Street, and they were in fact pouring Duco paint on canvases laid out on the floor. The musical interconnections you saw a bit there are enormous, and they range from the tango and Gardel, who was making movies in New York City and was an international star, to the arrival from, critically, Cuba of the whole series of musicians who construct here rumba and mambo and the rest. And eventually, in fact, New York becomes a place that takes those arriving artists and mixes them with local artists, the mass communication industry, popular culture, and salsa, in fact, is the product of that. And people now think it comes from anywhere, nowhere, but in fact, it's a New York phenomenon. The interplay between those worlds.
And of course, Arthur Schomburg,
Yes.
the father of African American studies. Very few African Americans know that he was a Puerto Rican and an advocate of autonomy and independence against Spain before he arrived here.
Compadre Martí.
Right.
Well, you two are going to continue this discussion tonight at the CUNY Grad Center, which is over at 34th and 5th Avenue.
Yes,
you'll be joined by Maria Hinojosa and who else?
Well, several of the advisors who worked on the exhibition, and what we're going to kick around is the relationship precisely between the 350 years that we focus on in the exhibit and the post-1945 period. Was one an acorn and the other the tree, or were things so different in the contemporary world that there's a cut there?
Well, Mike Wallace, we're going to leave it there, co-author of Gotham and the curator at the historian for the new exhibit at El Museo del Barrio, which is around 104th and 5th Avenue. And you can go up and see the exhibit there. That does it for our broadcast. Democracy Now! Is produced by Mike Burke, Sharif Odokadusa, Armata Angeli Kama, Steve Martinez, Nicole Salazar, Hani Masood, Robbie Karen, Mike DeFilippo, Miguel Noguera, our engineers. Special thanks to Becca Staley, Julie Crosby, Nick Gilla, Hugh Grant, Jessel Noor, Vesta Godars, and Uba. To our camera crew, John Randolph, Karen Krug Meadows, I'm Amy Goodmove, Juan Gonzalez. Thanks for joining us.